The Likens couple had an unstable marriage. They often traveled around Indiana selling candy, beer, and soda at carnival stands throughout the summer, frequently relocating and consistently facing severe financial challenges. The Likens sons regularly traveled with them to help with their work, but Sylvia and Jenny were discouraged from joining, mainly out of concern for their safety and education. As a result, the sisters often stayed with relatives, usually their grandmother. By June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny were living with their parents in Indianapolis. On July 3rd, their mother was arrested and subsequently jailed for shoplifting. Shortly after, Lester Likens arranged for his daughters to stay with Gertrude Banaszewski, a mother of two girls, Paula and Stephanie, whom the sisters had recently met at Arsenal Technical High School. When making this arrangement, Gertrude assured Lester that she would take care of his daughters as if they were her own children, but the reality would prove tragically different. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana, USA. She was the third of 5 children born to carnival workers Lester Likens and his wife, Betty Likens, formerly Grimes when she was single. Sylvia grew up between 2 sets of twins, Daniel and Diana, who were 2 years older, and Benny and Jenny, who were a year younger. Her little sister Jenny had polio, which weakened one of her legs significantly, causing her to limp noticeably. She had to wear a steel brace on her leg to help her walk. Her parents, Lester and Betty, had a rocky marriage. They often sold candy, beer, and soft drinks at carnival booths throughout Indiana all summer long, constantly moving and frequently facing serious financial difficulties. The Likens children sometimes traveled with them to help out, but Sylvia and Jenny often stayed with relatives, mostly with their grandmother. This arrangement not only kept the young girls safe, but also allowed them to continue their education more steadily. From a young age, Sylvia took on babysitting and did errands for neighbors and friends. She also did household chores like ironing clothes, earning a little bit of money to buy things for herself. She often shared her earnings with her mom. Those who knew her said Sylvia was a friendly, confident, and charming girl. She had long, wavy, light brown hair that fell just below her shoulders. Her friends called her Cookie. Despite her vibrant personality, Sylvia was self-conscious about her smile because she was missing a front tooth, which she lost while playing with one of her brothers as a child. She loved music, especially the Beatles, and was very protective of her younger sister Jenny. Jenny was much shyer and less secure. The sisters often visited a local skating rink where Sylvia would help Jenny skate, holding her hand as Jenny relied heavily on her stronger leg. In June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny Likens were living with their parents in Indianapolis. The following month, their mother was arrested and later jailed for theft. Shortly thereafter, Lester arranged for his younger daughters to stay with Gertrude Banaszewski, a mother of 2 girls, Paula and Stephanie, whom the Likens sisters had met at Arsenal Technical High School. Gertrude assured Lester that she would look after the girls as if they were her own until his return. A little after the 4th of July celebrations, the Likens sisters moved to 3850 East New York Street, while their father, older brothers, and later their mother went to the East Coast with the carnival. The deal with Gertrude was that she would receive $20 a week in exchange for hosting Sylvia and Jenny and taking care of them until they returned in November. Initially, everything at the Banaszewski home seemed normal. Sylvia got along well with Stephanie, singing along to pop records and willingly helping with household chores. The Lycan sisters regularly attended Sunday school with the other Banaszewski children, and the pastor praised Sylvia's kindness and respect for sacred matters. Although Lester had agreed to pay Gertrude, the payment started to arrive late, usually a day or two beyond the scheduled dates. However, this delay soon began to irritate Gertrude. Out of frustration, she started mistreating the girls, beginning with spanking them on their bare buttocks with various instruments, such as a 1/4-inch thick paddle, making statements such as, "Well, I took care of you two little bitches for a week for nothing." As the payment delays became more frequent, the beatings and mistreatment escalated. On one occasion, both girls were hit about 15 times on the back with the paddle after Paula accused them of eating too much at a church dinner they had attended with the other children. It had only been a month since they had been staying with the Banaszewski family, and it was now the end of August. By that time, Gertrude had begun to focus all her frustration and abuse almost exclusively on Sylvia. Some speculated that jealousy might have been the driving factor, as Sylvia was not only beautiful, but also had her whole life ahead of her. As the days went by, the abuse and mistreatment escalated. In addition to more frequent beatings, the sisters, particularly Sylvia, were starved. Often they were only given leftovers or spoiled food from the trash cans. On one occasion, Sylvia was accused of stealing candies, though she had actually bought them. Another time, she was publicly humiliated. Sylvia claimed she had a boyfriend in Long Beach, whom she had met in the spring when her family lived in California. As she shared stories about those days with Stephanie and Jenny, Sylvia mentioned that once she had snuggled under the covers with her boyfriend. Hearing this, Gertrude asked, "Why did you do that, Sylvia?" Sylvia shrugged and replied, "I don't know," and shrugged. A few days later, Gertrude brought up the topic again, suggesting mockingly, "Your stomach seems to be getting bigger, Sylvia. Looks like you might be having a baby." Sylvia thought it was a joke and responded, "Yeah, it must be getting big then." The abuse escalated. Gertrude repeatedly brought up Sylvia's interactions with boys, insinuating that any contact would surely lead to pregnancy. Suddenly, one day she kicked Sylvia in the genitals. Paula, one of Gertrude's daughters who was overweight, 3 months pregnant, and jealous of Sylvia's looks, joined in the attack. She pulled Sylvia from her chair to the kitchen floor and yelled, "You're not fit to sit in a chair." On another occasion, while the family was having dinner, Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy Gordon Lepper forced Sylvia to eat a hot dog overloaded with mustard, ketchup, and other spices. Naturally, Sylvia vomited, and they cruelly made her swallow what she had thrown up. Exhausted from all the abuse, Sylvia apparently spread a rumor at school accusing Stephanie and Paula of prostitution. One day, a boy made propositions to Stephanie at school, mentioning Sylvia had started the rumor. When they got home from school, Stephanie confronted Sylvia, who admitted to starting the rumor. In retaliation, Stephanie punched Sylvia hard. Sylvia, crying, apologized, and Stephanie also started crying. Randolph Hubbard, 15, Stephanie's boyfriend, learned about the incident and the rumors and brutally attacked Sylvia. He slapped her, slammed her head against the wall, and then threw her down on the floor. Gertrude also joined in, repeatedly using the paddle to beat Sylvia. Every day at the Banaszewski residence was a nightmare, with the episodes of violence only worsening. On one occasion, Paula punched Sylvia in the face with such force that she fractured her own wrist, focusing all her blows on Sylvia's mouth and eyes. Later, Paula used the cast on her arm to hit Sylvia even harder. But the violence wasn't just physical. The Lycan sisters were also subjected to verbal and psychological abuse. On one occasion, Gertrude accused Sylvia of being promiscuous and engaging in prostitution. She delivered a lengthy tirade about the filth of prostitution and the degradation of women in general. Afterwards, she forced young Jenny to hit her own older sister, threatening that if she didn't comply, she would suffer the same fate as Sylvia. The assaults on the Likens girls didn't only come from the Banaszewski family. Coy Hubbard and several of his classmates frequently visited Gertrude's home and tormented Sylvia both physically and verbally. Often Gertrude's own children, and even Gertrude herself, would join in to inflict harm on Sylvia. The neighborhood children routinely beat Sylvia. Sometimes they used her as a practice dummy in violent judo sessions, sawing her body, burning her skin with burning sticks. They went so far as to severely injure little Sylvia's genitals. To entertain Gertrude and her teenage accomplices, Sylvia was forced to undress in the living room and masturbate with a bottle. Afterwards, Gertrude would tell everyone that this act of humiliation was to show Jenny what kind of girl her sister was. Over time, Gertrude banned Sylvia from attending school after she confessed to stealing a gym suit from school. She had only taken it because Gertrude refused to buy her clothes. This not only disrupted her education but also led to severe punishment. Gertrude repeatedly beat Sylvia with a 7-centimeter wide police belt. Gertrude shifted the conversation to the evils of premarital sex and then brutally kicked Likens in the genitals. During this attack, Stephanie came to Likens' defense, shouting, "She didn't do anything." Gertrude continued her torment by burning Likens' fingertips with matches before further whipping her. A few days later, Gertrude again used the police belt to repeatedly whip Jenny after she reportedly stole a single tennis shoe from school to wear on her stronger foot. Due to the increasing frequency and brutality of the torture and mistreatment, Sylvia gradually became incontinent. She was denied access to the bathroom and was forced to wet herself as a form of punishment for her incontinence. On October 6, 1965, Gertrude threw Sylvia Likens into the basement and tied her up. She often kept Sylvia naked, barely fed her, and frequently denied her water. Sylvia was almost always tied to the stair railing in the basement, with her feet barely touching the ground. The Banaszewski family occasionally paused their physical and mental torment to watch their favorite TV shows. They even involved neighborhood boys who paid 5 cents each to see Sylvia's body displayed and to participate in humiliating her, beating her, burning her, and ultimately mutilating her. During her captivity in the basement, Gertrude and her children tied and gagged Sylvia, then placed her in a bathtub filled with scalding water. They proceeded to rub salt into her wounds. Shortly after this incident, the father of a neighborhood boy named Michael John Monroe anonymously called Arsenal School to report that a girl with open sores all over her body was living at the Banaszewski house. Since Sylvia had not attended school for several days, a school nurse visited Gertrude's address to investigate. Gertrude told the nurse that Sylvia had run away from home the previous week and that she did not know her whereabouts. She added that Sylvia was out of control and that her open sores were the result of her refusal to maintain personal hygiene. Gertrude also claimed that Sylvia was a bad influence on both her own children and her sister. The school did not conduct any further investigations into Sylvia's whereabouts or well-being. In mid-October, John Banaszewski Jr. cruelly tormented Sylvia by offering her a plate of soup and swiftly pulling it away as she tried to eat with her hands. By then, Sylvia was already suffering from extreme malnutrition. That day, Gertrude Banaszewski allowed Sylvia to sleep upstairs, but only on the condition that she did not wet the bed. At night, Sylvia quietly asked Jenny to give her a glass of water in secret before she went to sleep. The next morning, Gertrude discovered that the girl had peed herself. As punishment, she was once again forced to masturbate using a glass bottle in the presence of the Banaszewski children. Shortly thereafter, Gertrude shouted for Likens to return to the kitchen, then ordered her to strip naked before proclaiming to her, "You have branded my daughters. Now I am going to brand you." She began carving the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," onto Likens's abdomen with a heated needle. When Gertrude was unable to complete the markings, she instructed one of the neighborhood kids, 14-year-old Richard Dean Hobbs, to finish etching the words into Likens's flesh as she took Jenny to a nearby grocery store, in what Hobbs would later insist were short, light etchings. He continued to brand the text into Likens's abdomen as she clenched her teeth and moaned. Richard, like 10-year-old Shirley, took Sylvia to the basement, where they each proceeded to use an anchor bolt in an attempt to burn the letter S beneath Likens' left breast, although they applied one section of the loop backwards, and this deep burn scar would resemble the number 3. On that grim night, after enduring terrible abuse, Sylvia told her sister Jenny, "I know you don't want me to die, but I'm going to die, I'm sure of it." The next day, Gertrude woke Sylvia and forced her to write a letter while dictating its contents. The plan was sinister. They intended to deceive the Likens' parents into believing that Sylvia had run away from the Banishevsky residence. The content of this letter was intended to frame a group of anonymous local boys for extensively abusing and mutilating Likens after she had initially agreed to engage in sexual relations with them before they inflicted the extreme abuse and torture upon her body. After Likens had written this letter, Gertrude finished formulating her plan to have John Jr. and Jenny blindfold Sylvia, then take her to a nearby wooded area known as Jimmy's Forest and leave her there to die. Sylvia was once again tied to the stair railing in the basement. Gertrude offered her cookies to eat, but Sylvia refused them, saying, "Give them to the dog, I don't want them." In response, Gertrude forcefully stuffed the cookies into Sylvia's mouth, and she and John began to beat her, focusing on her stomach. On the morning of October 26th, Sylvia was unable to speak intelligibly or coordinate her limb movements properly. Gertrude took her to the kitchen, leaned her against the wall, and tried to feed her a donut and a glass of milk, but Sylvia couldn't hold the glass properly. Frustrated, Gertrude threw Sylvia to the floor and then returned her to the basement. Soon after, Sylvia became delirious, moaning and muttering repeatedly. When Paula asked Sylvia to recite the English alphabet, Sylvia could not get past the first 4 letters or get up from the floor. That afternoon, several of the neighborhood tormentors gathered in the basement. Sylvia flailed her arms in an apparent attempt to point out the faces of the tormentors she recognized, shouting names like, "You're Ricky" and "You're Gertie." Minutes later, Sylvia tried unsuccessfully to bite into a rotten pear she was given, saying she couldn't feel her teeth. Hearing this, Jenny reminded her, "Don't you remember, Sylvia? Your front tooth fell out when you were 7 years old." Exhausted from all the abuse and certain she would die there, Sylvia desperately tried to escape the basement but collapsed without the strength to make it up the stairs. This attempt was met with the harshest of punishments. Gertrude struck Sylvia's head with excessive violence. Sylvia lost consciousness, and Gertrude just stood by, watching her for a while. Shortly after, at 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs returned to the Banishevsky residence and immediately went to the basement. He found Stephanie crying and embracing Sylvia's emaciated and lacerated body after their mother had ordered her to clean Sylvia's body. Stephanie and Richard then decided to give Sylvia a warm, soapy bath and dress her in clean clothes. They laid her on a mattress in one of the bedrooms. Sylvia murmured her last wish, hoping her father would be with her, or at least that she could be taken home. After enduring severe punishment and weakened from lack of food, Sylvia finally succumbed to her injuries and died. When Stephanie realized Sylvia wasn't breathing, she tried to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, while Gertrude repeatedly screamed at the children in the house that Sylvia was faking her death. Initially, Gertrude hit Sylvia's body with a book, yelling at her that she was lying and pretending in an attempt to wake her. Soon, in a panic, Gertrude told Richard Hobbs to call the police from a nearby payphone. When the police arrived at their address around 6:30 p.m., Gertrude led the officers to the bedroom. She showed them Sylvia's extensively beaten and mutilated body lying on a dirty mattress. She then handed them the letter that Sylvia had been forced to write. Gertrude also claimed that she had been caring for the young girl for an hour or more before her death, after having applied antiseptic to Sylvia's wounds in a futile attempt at first aid. She told the police that Sylvia had run away from home with several teenagers before returning to her house that afternoon, bare-chested and with the note in her hands. Holding a Bible, Paula, having declared to everyone in the house that Sylvia's death was meant to happen, looked at Jenny and calmly said, "If you want to live with us, Jenny, we'll treat you like our own sister." Following instructions she had received before the police arrived, Jenny recited the rehearsed version of the events leading up to Sylvia's death, before whispering to the officers to take them away and that she would tell them everything. The formal statement provided by Jenny Likens led to the arrest of Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. Baniszewski on suspicion of Sylvia's murder, just hours after her body was discovered. The same day, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested and charged with the same crimes. The three older Baniszewski children, along with Coy Hubbard, were placed in a nearby juvenile detention center. The younger Baniszewski children and Richard Hobbs were held at the Indianapolis Child Guardian's home. All were detained without bail pending trial. Initially, Gertrude denied any involvement in Sylvia Likens' death, though just a day into her detention, she confessed to knowing the children and acknowledged that her daughter Paula and Coy Hubbard had physically and emotionally abused Sylvia. Gertrude also admitted to forcing the girl to sleep in the basement on approximately 3 occasions when she had wet the bed. She became evasive when an officer suggested that the probable reasons for Sylvia's incontinence were her mental distress and kidney injuries. Paula, showing no remorse, signed a statement admitting she had repeatedly beaten Sylvia. She also confessed to an incident where Sylvia's wrist was fractured and admitted to other acts of brutality, such as pushing her down the basement stairs 2 or 3 times. John Jr. confessed to whipping Sylvia once and often used his fist to abuse her. He admitted to burning Sylvia with matches on several occasions and added that his mother had repeatedly burned the girl with cigarettes. The autopsy of Sylvia Likens' body revealed she had suffered over 150 separate injuries across her body and was extremely emaciated at the time of her death. The injuries varied in location, nature, severity, and healing stage. They included burns, severe bruises, and extensive damage to muscles and nerves. Her vaginal cavity was swollen and nearly closed, though an examination determined her hymen was still intact, debunking Gertrude's claims that Sylvia had been 3 months pregnant and the accusations of prostitution and promiscuity. The official cause of Sylvia Marie Likens' death was identified as subdural hematoma, resulting from a strong blow to the right side of her head. The shock she suffered, primarily due to severe and prolonged damage to her skin and subcutaneous tissue, as well as chronic malnutrition, were also noted by the doctor in relation to Sylvia's death. Rigor mortis had fully developed by the time her body was discovered, indicating that Sylvia could have been dead for up to 8 hours before she was found. Although the autopsy doctor noted that Sylvia had been bathed recently, possibly post-mortem, this action could have accelerated the loss of body temperature and therefore the onset of rigor mortis. Gertrude Baniszewski, her eldest daughter Paula, her son John, and two neighborhood youths, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were tried and convicted in May 1966 for the neglect, torture, and murder of Sylvia Likens. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gertrude Banaszewski guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment but was paroled in 1985. Paula was found guilty of second-degree murder and was released in 1972. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John were found guilty of manslaughter and spent less than 2 years in the Indiana Reformatory before being granted parole on February 27, 1968. The citizens of Indiana consider the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens the worst crime ever committed in their state, and a lead investigator from the Indiana Police Department has described it as the most sadistic case he investigated in his 35 years of service. Sylvia died on October 26 in Indianapolis, Indiana, USA. Her parents were supposed to return for her and her sister in November, but Sylvia passed away before their arrival. The Likens sisters were fearful of reporting the increasing incidents of abuse and neglect to family members or adults at their school, worried that doing so might worsen their already dire situation. Both sisters feared that speaking out would only worsen their situation. Jenny, the younger sister, struggled against the urge to inform family members because Gertrude had threatened that she would be abused and tortured just as her sister was if she spoke up. Jenny also faced harassment from neighborhood girls who ridiculed or occasionally beat her whenever she mentioned Sylvia's situation. The closest neighbors of the Banaszewski residence, a middle-aged couple, along with other families in the neighborhood, suspected or had seen signs that the girls were being mistreated, but no one dared to report it to the authorities. Nothing was done to stop the abuse the Likens sisters were enduring, and no one could rescue them in time from this nightmare. All those involved in her torture and murder were sentenced to prison. Although some of the culprits did not serve their full sentences, they could not escape the scars and the horror they caused, which will follow them for the rest of their lives. With this, we conclude today's episode of Unreal True Crime. Once again, I remind you to subscribe and leave a like to let me know you appreciate my work. Good night, and see you next time.